Hello, Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. A gubernatorial campaign that produced only one debate, and it was contentious, and lots of angry rhetoric that had more to do with Washington than Louisiana, mercifully comes to an end tomorrow. We'll look tonight at the politics of that and other select races and how campaigning has changed. On the ballot for us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Clancy Dubose, political editor, Gambit newspaper, Tyler Bridges, reporter, the Times-Picayune, New Orleans Advocate, and Stephanie Grace, columnist, also with the Times-Picayune, New Orleans Advocate. Tyler, we're going to go over to you because you were there for the third visit of the President Trump in Bossier City last night. How'd it go?
It's a rollicking affair to go up there. I tell you, I got up to the parking lot at 3 o'clock in Bossier City yesterday for a 7 o'clock event, and there was no spaces available. And it was a long, long line of people to get in. And once Trump finally arrived, it was just loud cheers after loud cheers, or boos, and you could probably guess who people were booing.
Who were they booing?
Nancy Pelosi, crying Chuck Schumer,
oh my goodness.
Sleepy Joe,
man, right?
Sleepy Joe Biden,
Pencil neck, Adam Schiff.
yeah, Shifty Shift, yep.
So
was it kind of like a tailgate beforehand when you got there in the parking lot, or were people just standing around waiting to get in?
It felt like a rock concert. There was all sorts of people selling T-shirts and caps, and people were excited.
Do they boo John Bel Edwards as lustily as they boo the Washington Democrats, I wonder?
No.
That's interesting. Okay.
They also boo the media.
Oh, of course.
And of course, we should say that the president was campaigning for Eddie Rispone. How many people there last night, would you say?
The arena capacity is 14,000, not entirely full, but very loud crowd. Loud music beforehand.
Right.
A lot of Rolling Stones music beforehand, for whatever reason.
Well, the music is good.
Yeah.
So, why should voters vote for Eddie Rispone, according to President Trump?
Because John Bel Edwards is a radical liberal trial lawyer. At one point, he called him pro-abortion, which is a false statement. He said he's weak on the Second Amendment. I don't think that's probably an accurate.
That's a lie.
Yeah, and said Eddie Rispone is a businessman. He's going to create jobs. Louisiana has high car insurance rates and high tax rates under this governor.
And the other reason he's saying, of course, is to send a message about me to those Democrats in Washington.
No, that's a great point, Stephanie, because he repeatedly talked about that message. And even Eddie Rispone, when he was given a few minutes to talk, he said, yeah, vote for me to send a message. And I think Trump's line was to those corrupt Democrats in Washington.
Well, in the radio commercials, a phrase that I've heard them use, I've heard them first time this week, is the impeachment liberals, that they added the word impeachment now. And so as though if you vote for John Bel Edwards, it's a vote for impeachment of Trump, and if John Bel Edwards wins, Trump's could be impeached. I mean that's what.
And John Bel Edwards has avoided taking a position on impeachment pretty studiously.
That issue is going to work.
That's
it's
right.
going to have an impact on the governor's race in Louisiana.
Right.
Yeah, the Trump administration's pulling out all the stops. Vice President Pence was called into Jeff Crouer's station in New Orleans today, Donald Trump Jr. yesterday. So it's not just the 3 visits by the president, which is pretty amazing in of itself.
So Rispone did talk to the crowd, you said, just for a few minutes. Anything new revealed, or was it the same speech?
No, and we haven't heard a lot of specifics from Eddie Rispone. I think his first line last night was, Louisiana is Trump country. Certainly the arena last night was Trump country.
And that was kind of his first line when he kicked off this campaign, remember? I mean, he did that ad with the Trump bumper sticker, and he ran Trump. He ran the full-page ad in the newspaper about immigration policy, which is not a gubernatorial issue. It was linking himself to Trump. That has been the constant here.
One of the things that really hasn't gotten a lot of attention, maybe we in the media haven't done enough of it, is remember in the first ad he talked about how he said New Orleans is a sanctuary city. Yes. And I think if you pointed out in your columns, well, even the Trump administration says it isn't. Correct. But there was a line last night about we're not going to let New Orleans be a sanctuary city, and that was a big roar from the crowd about that. And also something that hasn't gotten a lot of attention but might be of interest to people here is that Eddie Rispone came to the legislature when the legislature was in session to tell Republicans to vote against the fair share infrastructure package that's actually going to be on the ballot Saturday. And he was opposed to it. I'm not quite sure why.
Which is the Mayor LaToya initiative, LaToya Cantrell initiative.
And that was approved by the legislature, and now it's on the ballot Saturday.
Yeah.
Okay, so Trump aside, this is a race for the governor of Louisiana, Eddie Rispone.
You have to keep reminding yourself that, don't
we
you?
do have to keep reminding ourselves that. And as you said, Eddie Rispone really hasn't laid out exactly what he would do, but he has focused on some key issues like lowering car insurance rates,
right.
constitutional
now, how he would
convention.
do that, he doesn't really explain. Constitutional convention, he absolutely wants a constitutional convention. John Bel Edwards is against that. That means opening up all kinds of issues that have really been settled. The homestead exemption, of course, is the one that John Bel Edwards likes to talk about, but a lot of things. Funding for K-12 education, all of those tax exemptions that are in the Constitution and kind of carve-outs, they all have constituencies. I mean, that's why they're there. Coastal funding, a bunch of things. He has not said what he wants to change in the Constitution, and that is really interesting because, of course, the devil is always in the details. Who would be the delegates to a constitutional convention? What role would the legislature play? All kinds of things.
Yeah, and Eddie Rispone talks about we've got to lower taxes. Well,
right.
if you're going to lower some people's taxes, I think you're making this point. Well, who is going to pay more?
Exactly.
And as you note, the governor has filled in.
Or what services will be cut.
The governor has filled in the blanks that say, all right, he wants to cut various taxes, maybe even the personal income tax. Does that mean that the property taxes will go up through the elimination or the reduction of the homestead exemption? We don't know.
Okay.
Well, Rispone's formula is I'm going to cut everybody's taxes, but I'm going to spend more money on infrastructure, which of course is impossible.
Right.
Yeah,
and TOPS and all of that.
He's going to keep everything funded just like it is, but we're going to lower taxes, which is what Bobby Jindal did. It created a $2 billion deficit.
But
And that has given the governor the opportunity to make that same point. A vote for Eddie Rispone is a vote backwards to the Jindal era.
Right.
And of course, one thing that is near and dear to the governor's heart, excuse me, is Medicaid expansion. And Eddie Rispone has said that he would freeze it, which we're really not quite sure what that means.
Well, I think one or two other states have frozen it. When you freeze it, what it effectively says is nobody gets put on new and nobody gets renewed. So over time, fairly quickly, in fact, it shrinks the Medicaid rolls. And the one thing that is not disputable is that the expansion of Medicaid has done several things for Louisiana. It has actually helped us balance the budget because it brings in more federal dollars. It increases employment because the people who take care of Medicaid patients are doctors, nurses, paramedics, physicians, assistants. These are all highly trained white-collar jobs. And it also creates a healthier workforce, which makes the workforce more productive. And how you argue against that, I don't know.
Hospitals too. In
Oh,
some
definitely.
Of these areas
That's the fourth thing. Edwards has said over and over again, and as part of his pitch to rural voters, 0 rural hospitals have closed in Louisiana in the last 7 or so years. You look at Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, dozens of rural hospitals have closed across the South. None in Louisiana.
One of the issues with this freeze is that if you look at who that population is that might qualify for Medicaid expansion, a lot of people who have seasonal work maybe or intermittent work, so they might roll on and roll off. There might be some times when they get employer insurance or have incomes too high, probably less likely, or not. So it would really kind of impact that cycle.
Let's talk generally. I mean, the governor was hoping that he would do it in the primary, but here he is in the runoff, and it's been a race. It's definitely a race.
It's definitely a race. I was thinking on the way here, it reminds me a little bit of the Alabama-LSU football game. I'm not going to say which candidate is which team, but it's the top two. And it's going to come down to the wire. And, if you remember that game basically came down to an onside kick. And the metaphor here is the onside kick is like turnout.
Yeah.
Who's going to turn out more of their voters? Because they're very evenly matched. Polls are, I don't know of any poll that shows Rispone ahead by more than half a point. And there was only one that did that.
Yeah.
All the other polls had Edwards ahead by anywhere from a half point to about 7 or 8 points. But you know what? Those polls don't mean anything in the face of Donald Trump. He is the poll slayer. I'm not saying that Rispone is going to win. I'm just saying you cannot predict what's going to happen based on polls when Donald Trump has just come to the state.
One interesting dynamic is that the Republicans are really using Trump to try to get out the vote. So are the Democrats, because
he's a double-edged sword.
And in early voting, at least, and in kind of anecdotal evidence, they're doing much better in terms of turnout than they did in the primary, which was really Edwards' support, his base did not turn out for him.
He had a very bad turnout operation in the primary. I wrote in Gambit that it sucked, and one time I saw him in the runoff, he said, I read your column and I listened. So he basically fired the Washington firm that was doing his turnout in the primary, and then went back to local folks. And down to the parish level, even sometimes precinct level.
And people are jumping in, legislators and
civic leaders, yes.
A lot of people are just getting involved. But what we don't really know is the Rispone turnout effort.
Right.
It may be more sophisticated and it may be more energized
and
than
it's well funded by Washington.
Yes, they're spending $1 million to do street level, which, I think they're going to go to targeted precincts, which is a smart thing to do. They know where their vote is. It's in white rural Louisiana.
Let's bring Errol into this discussion too, because you're there. You wanted to talk about parties and what they,
Oh, this is the party segment right here?
Yeah, let's get into that.
All right. Well, one thing, just seeing this campaign and thinking about elections in the past, there was a time like when it was like from the 20s, maybe into the 60s, when if you looked at the Louisiana governor's race, it was, well, first of all, it was all Democrats, and so there wasn't a party issue. And there's the longest period when it was, anytime you have an election where you're electing one person for a job, you're going to see two divisions, you're going to see two sides that evolve. Like for the longest time, I remember it was, my grandparents talking about the candidates for the long organizations versus the anti-long people, the machines versus the reformers. There was always that sort of thing. But it was all local. But it was all within the Democratic Party. That, of course, changed with the open primary when the Republican Party became more significant, and what was the conservative wing of the Democratic Party became more the Republicans. A lot of those people changed, and so now there's party identity, whereas there was a long time in Louisiana where party identity really wasn't much, but now, in addition to the party identity, there's a really heavy emphasis on the liberal versus conservative and progressive, and so I think that's what's changed about it.
And the big thing within the Republican Party, the big development this election cycle is it's no longer liberal and conservative, it's conservative and true conservative or real conservative. It's David Vitter directed a group called the Louisiana Committee for a Republican Majority, aimed at getting a GOP majority in both chambers of the legislature. It succeeded in 2011, right before the elections were held, and then they gained more seats, and they've steadily gained more. Now, the Republicans have become so strong in the legislature that there are factions even within the party, because there are those who are merely conservative and those who are, they call themselves true conservatives or conservative enough. So now that same organization earlier this year changed its name to the Louisiana Committee for a Conservative Majority, and you actually have Republicans effectively getting primaried, even though we have a nonpartisan primary system in Louisiana. There's a senator up in the Bossier area, in Shreveport area, Ryan Gotti, who coincidentally was a classmate of John Bell Edwards. He's a Republican, he's a conservative, but he's not conservative enough. And they think, well, he was John Bell Edwards' friend in law school, we got to go get him. And he's considered a trial lawyer, et cetera. So they ran a right-wing Republican against him, backed by the LCCM and Lobby and others. And I think they're going to take him out. And they're cherry-picking some other races. They're trying to get a supermajority in both the House and the Senate. They're going to succeed in the Senate, and in the House, they're down to 1 or 2 races, but they don't just want a Republican majority. They want a hardcore right-wing, obedient Republican
and of course,
majority.
a big thing about this race, this contest, is money. Where's the money coming from? Who's spending what? Who's paying for all these ads? I mean, people can't wait till those ads are just gone.
The TV stations aren't among them. But
they're making some money on it. So let's talk about funding of this campaign.
John Bell Edwards raised over $10 million just for the primary alone. He began raising money as soon as he was elected governor. So he was very, very well funded. And Eddie Rispone mostly self-financed his campaign. And in the primary, Ralph Abraham, who finished third, didn't have very very much money, and now money is pouring in from all different sorts of places. It's noteworthy that, remember, Eddie Rispone is running against the trial lawyers, and the trial lawyers have poured in hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars into Gumbo PAC, which is the pro-John Bel Edwards super PAC. There's a national Democratic group that wants to prevent Republican redistricting. That they've poured over $300,000 into an effort to try to re-elect John Bel Edwards.
And of course, we've just mentioned those ads, and we have just really seen a slew of ads, and there's been some controversy where one ad was actually pulled against
One
John
ad that
Bel
was
Edwards.
put out by a group fronting for Lane Grigsby, the controversial kingmaker, self-proclaimed kingmaker, Republican mega donor in Baton Rouge. He's been a Republican mega donor for many, many years, and behind the scenes, he's always accustomed to getting his own way, and he's the big cheese behind Eddie Rispone. In fact, Rispone calls him his mentor. He had an ad claiming that Murray Starkle, who was a West Point graduate, who was John Bel Edwards' roommate at West Point, close friend of Edwards, he spent his time in the Army after West Point, I think in the Army Corps of Engineers.
Right.
So he knows about wetland things, and then when he retired from that, he went into the business of wetland mitigation and other things dealing with wetlands and coastal conservation. Well, he joined a group that applied to be eligible to bid on a contract from the Louisiana Coastal Protection Agency. And I think they were one of either 4 or 6 groups that cleared the first hurdle. Well, Grigsby's PAC put out an ad that said, Murray Starkle, the roommate, he scores big. And basically, it gives the impression, the clear impression, that Starkle got a $65 million contract, when in fact, no contract had been awarded to anybody. And so the ad had to get pulled, and they kept coming back, changing a word here and there, but they kept leaving the distinct impression. It finally was brought to a judge in civil district court, and she issued a temporary restraining order saying you can't run this ad. It was appealed. The Court of Appeals today said the judge made the right ruling, but the wording of the TRO was a little bit defective, so technically it was reversed and remanded back to the trial court just to fix the language. But there was a concurring opinion that said, I want to make it clear they lied in that ad. So the ad should be off the air, but I'm sure there are plenty more behind it attacking John Bel Edwards.
And the one other funding source we should mention, of course, is, Eddie Rispone himself, who has put what, $12 million of his own money into this.
And so we're going to see a real big move to marshal the forces tomorrow, get out to vote. And the money goes to that as well, too.
Yes,
right,
on both sides.
To really mobilize the voters.
And as I mentioned earlier, this is a new thing where the Republicans are actually putting what traditionally is called street money. They're putting money, $1 million into an on-the-ground get out to vote. Normally they do an air campaign. Donald Trump, to me, is a one-man get out to vote effort.
But as critical as the black vote is to Edwards, is there still a structure out there like there used to be in terms of getting the black vote out? You know, the type of political organizations.
There is that, but it varies from parish to parish. And we forgot to mention earlier, one of the major players in organizing black turnout statewide has been the Urban League.
Okay, well, let's get to another race right now, and we just have a little bit of time to speak about, and that's the state Supreme Court. That also has had some nasty ads out.
Yeah, this is a North Shore, South Shore. It's a district that consists of the lakefront, a little bit of mid-city of New Orleans, most of the East Bank of Jefferson Parish, a little bit of the West Bank of Jefferson Parish, and then all of St. Tammany, Washington, Tangipahoa, and St. Helena parishes. When you look at it geographically, 61% of the registered vote is on the North Shore. But for the last, I don't know how many years, the justice holding that seat has come from the South Shore. Now we have a North Shore judge, Judge Will Crane, from the North Shore, who's a judge on the Court of Appeal, and Judge Hans Liljeburg from the South Shore, Jefferson Parish, on a different division of the Court of Appeal. One's in the Fifth Circuit, one's on the First Circuit, but they're running against each other for that seat. And it's also a proxy war for LWYES, the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, and the trial lawyers. LWYES is behind Crane, and the trial lawyers are behind Hans Liljeburg.
Pretty tight race.
Yeah, they both claim that they're not talking about trial lawyers and business. They're talking about law and order. But it's a proxy war. The last few Supreme Court races that we've had have also been the same kind of proxy war between business and trial lawyers have won the last 2.
Okay, we'll see how that one goes. Steph, legislative races, we have a slew of those still.
We do, and of course control of the legislature has been a big issue statewide. In a lot of the local legislative races, it's not about party because they're Republican districts or Democratic districts. And in New Orleans, we have a bunch of open seats. They're Democratic districts, so these are Democrat primaries, but they're pretty heated. In mine, actually, who's the more true Democrat is the big issue. That's District 98, and that is Kia Sherman versus Amy Freeman to replace Neil Abramson, who ironically is the Democrat who kind of sided with the Republicans the last 4 years, so it was kind of controversial. That's an open seat. He was chairman of Ways and Means, right? And so that's a big loss for New Orleans. He was LaToya Cantrell's floor leader. Walt Leger, another big loss. He's also term limited out. Robert McKnight, Mandy Landry running in that district, also getting very heated. There's a state Senate district that's Orleans, St. Bernard, and West Bank of Jefferson. That's replacing J.P. Morrell, another for the delegation. 2 incumbent House members running, Joe Bowie versus John Bagneris. Out in the east, in Lower 9, there's another open house seat, Candace Newell, John Bagneris. So these are all, Willard, Matthew Willard and Eugene Green, so another one. So these are all Democratic seats in New Orleans or based in New Orleans. Heavy players kind of lining up, and there's
the one in the Lower 9, by the way, is Jimmy Harris's old seat.
Yes.
Candace Newell is one of the candidates running to replace him.
Yes.
And John Bagneris, she's running against Adonis
Expose.
Expose.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, there are a lot of names.
There's a lot of names, yeah.
Okay, I apologize
Got like
for
5
that.
house races in Orleans, yeah.
Cedric Richmond has a bunch of candidates he's supporting. LaToya Cantrell has a bunch of candidates she's supporting. Generally not the same candidates. It's interesting. And then you have a few Republican races in St. Tammany, which is, of course, the big Republican district. Not much in Jefferson. And really, again, the big question in the legislature is going to be, is there this supermajority, and what does that mean? Does that mean that it's a bunch, enough Republicans that they will, if John Bel Edwards is reelected, they really will be able to override what he wants to do, or will enough Republicans break off? Everybody has local issues. Everybody has things they want funded. The governor still has a lot of power. So that's going to be a really interesting dynamic if John Bel Edwards is reelected.
And as I think Clancy pointed out earlier, the Republicans have already won that 2/3 supermajority in the Senate, and they're close to winning it in the House. And there's 2 or 3 key elections that will be decided
in other parts of the state.
In other parts of the state that will be decided. That will decide whether Republicans get that 2/3 majority in the House. And then even if they do, as Stephanie points out, the tradition in Louisiana is that the governor can
pick off a few.
I mean, as they're always saying, there are always 2 camps. Traditionally, it's been the governor's camp and not the governor's camp in the legislature. We've moved towards more of a party system. So if Eddie Risponi wins, you have a Republican governor and a Republican legislature. So what will the 2 sides be there? Because it's not going to be all harmony, because everybody has their own interests. So that'll be very interesting to watch, too.
It definitely will be. Okay.
Yeah.
One other area for races is Jefferson Parish. Council races there, Clancy.
We have a pair of council races in Jefferson Parish, and it's interesting that in the primary, Jefferson was the hotbed of local politics. You had a handful of council races. You had a couple of parish-wide races. They've mostly been settled. We've got 2 of the 5 district council races that have runoffs. Council districts 2 and 3, both of those straddle the river. Council district 2 is a majority white district. It includes Harahan, River Ridge. That's where the population base, but also some parts of the West Bank. And in that race, you have Dino Bonanno, who's a longtime civil servant, has held a number of positions in parish government, against Michael O'Brien, who actually has run for the council before in a different district. They both made it to the runoff. I think Bonanno's probably a slight favorite, but you never know. With the big turnout that's coming, anything can happen. Council District 3 is the African-American majority district in Jefferson Parish on the council. You have 2 people, obviously, in the runoff. Byron Lee, a former council member, and Derek Shepard, a former state senator who went to jail for federal corruption charges and money laundering in connection with a scheme involving Bill Jefferson. And he's running on a platform of, do you believe in second chances? And apparently enough people do. But that race attracted 11 people in the primary, and those are the 2 that ended up running first and second. I think Shepard ran first, and he may even be a slight favorite. But again, lots of people weighing in on that, and it'll be very interesting to see how that one shakes out.
We have a little bit of time before we do that thing at the end. Should we just touch on St. Tammany right now? I think you were going to touch
Sure.
on it.
St. Tammany, you've got some interesting races as well, because you have, first of all, St. Tammany is one of the largest concentrations of Republican voters in the state, so it's very important in the governor's race. 4 years ago, John Bel Edwards got 39% of the vote in St. Tammany in the runoff against David Vitter. He got 38% in the October 12th primary with a higher turnout than you had 4 years ago. So he basically held his vote. So we're going to be watching St. Tammany to see what kind of a percentage can John Bel Edwards get. If he can crack 40%, that's very good news for him statewide. Risponi, of course, wants to keep John Bel to below, say, 36, 35% or less if he can.
And Edwards has done better with the what you might call the conservative suburban vote in the New Orleans area.
His base has shrunk
than
to
he's done in the
basically
rest of the state.
his white base has shrunk down to Metro New Orleans. Now, back in St. Tammany, you got two parish-wide races, two parish-wide runoffs that will drive turnout across the board. There's a very hot race for parish president. Pat Brister actually trailed, and she's running against Mayor Cooper, the son of a former Mayor Cooper from Covington. Cooper ran first. Brister ran second, but she's run a very aggressive campaign in the runoff, going more on the attack than she did in the primary. And then there's a runoff for sheriff. In this case, the incumbent sheriff ran first. He looks like a little more of a favorite, but you really don't know. Whenever an incumbent gets in a runoff, including the runoff for governor, all bets are off.
Right. Okay, we're going to wrap up right now. We call looking ahead. You wanted to go over the issues
Down
on
at the bottom of the ballot in Orleans tomorrow will be 4 propositions. 3 of them are revenue generating. The most interesting is probably one creating a tax for short-term rentals.
On the screen there.
And then one of them has to do with the city's Human Relations Committee expanding powers for them.
All right, so that's something that people are really being urged to consider, and certainly Orleans Parish officials are saying please vote for it. There's a lot of emphasis for that. All right, Clarence, over to you.
Well, I just talked about the Jefferson Parish
Yeah, I know.
races. And
But you always have something to talk about,
Well,
Clarence.
no, I just think it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of vote Edwards. He got 51% in Jefferson in the runoff. He got 50 last time, 4 years ago. He got 53% this time. I think his target needs to be 55% or more in Jefferson this time.
Tyler.
Yeah, I'll be writing a look-ahead piece, or I'm sorry, the Sunday after the election, 8 days after the election, I'll be doing a very in-depth piece, kind of behind the scenes of how it all turned out. Whoever wins, behind the scenes.
We'll be looking for it. Staff.
And then next week, after New Orleanians vote on these revenue measures and after we find out if they approve them, the City Council is going to decide how much to roll forward the assessments, the millages. We have these new assessments that came out there. A lot of people are expecting their tax bill to go way up. There's a lot of pressure on the City Council to not claim all the tax revenue it can. It's interesting that they scheduled it for after the tax measures on the ballot.
Okay, election day tomorrow. Make sure you go to vote. Thanks, guys, for being here, and thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week from Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Yeah, go vote.